Hey everyone, it's Mark Bates. This is the Rabbit Room Apologetics Podcast, and I want to thank you all for being here. So, on this episode, we're going to take a couple of minutes and just kind of look back at this idea of, is there one perfect English translation? I don't think there is, okay? And why you may be doing yourself a small disservice if you're only reading one translation. One of the reasons I like a tool like the Logos Bible software is that you can compare multiple translations. This is just a small list of the translations I have. You don't need to have them all, but having two or three, you certainly want to have those. Okay, so one of the problems we immediately face is that ancient biblical Hebrew has, let's say, a little under 9,000, somewhere between 8,500 and 9,000 words in it. One Strong's Concordance analysis had it at 8674, right? Different Hebrew words that meant many different things. And the thing with Hebrew is that it's a root-based language, which is essentially there's a three-letter root that makes up almost every word, and that those prefixes those roots with a prefix and a suffix create all the variations of meaning. But, each Hebrew word carries a nuance of meaning then, because there's so few of them, right? Koine Greek, the Greek of the Bible, has about 5,500, give or take, words in it that are used in the Bible. There's a little bit more if you look at non-canonical writings in Koine Greek. But once again, it's not that many. Let's call it 6,000, let's say, words. And once again, you have a lot of things in Greek where you have verbs, where you have to worry about the tense, voice, mood, person, number. And sometimes they don't always match up with the way we consider it today, right? And so, especially since for some of the biblical writers, Koine Greek was not their primary language, it was a secondary language. So, though it would have been one they were very comfortable with back in Second Temple Judaism, it's still maybe Hebrew or Aramaic was still a primary language for them. And with anyone, if you talk to somebody who grew up speaking one language and are now in America, let's say speaking English, little things catch you, right? You're obviously from a Spanish-speaking country, or you're obviously from a Germanic-speaking country, because you inflected that just a little bit wrong, the way Americans would, and so those things come into play. So you have to deal with that kind of of example, and so even if you combine the two, you're looking at about 14,000 words, let's say, give or take. Modern English has about 171,000 words, give or take. I'm just looking at a study here. Currently in use. There are about 47,000 words that are obsolete, and that's in modern English, okay? If you start adding 17th century, 16th century, and 15th century English, and then older English, the numbers just explode. And in total, when you add all of the technical language that we've added to English, right? You can get upwards of 600,000 words in the English language. And so what happens is these older languages use far fewer words, and we are used to being much more technical in our language and having very precise language that we use for certain things. And that gets us trapped up when we're trying to convert from an ancient language into modern English. And so and I think I've talked about this before, when you look at all of the English translations, and I've studied under some of the people who were part of the committees that did these translations, right, for some of my language classes in seminary and such. These people are really concerned that they're getting the task done properly, but they have an issue. The first issue is, what type of a translation are they doing? Are they doing a formal equivalence, which is a word-for-word translation? So as much as possible, they're trying to replace the Hebrew and the Greek word with a single English word. And as you can see, that can become very difficult because of just the difference in the number of words and such, right? The advantage here is it's a lot easier to do things like I go into an interlinear here, which gives me the English word and then the attached below that the Hebrew or the Greek word, and so I can get into. And since I am functional in Hebrew and Greek from a study perspective, from an academic perspective, it helps me get into those languages. But you have this issue that it's still you have that tension. Are we definitely getting this word for word? The other end of the spectrum, and this always happens in the spectrum. No one does just purely word for word. The King James, the old 1617 King James, is probably the closest word for word translation, and that came from the old Bishop's Bible, which was definitely as much as possible as a word for word translation. They updated the Bishop's Bible a little bit, and if you don't have it, if you like the King James, and the King James is a great translation, make sure you get the 1611. Sorry, I said 1611 version, and get the one that has the translator's notes, where they talk about the job that they did, how they started with the Bishop's Bible as a starting point. They added to that. They found new Hebrew and Greek texts they were able to use. They had to make some decisions. They went on as to why they did certain things that they did. Okay, it's really fascinating sometimes to find out what these translators have to go through. Okay. Then the second one is the dynamic equivalence. That's thought for thought. So essentially, they'll take a sentence in the original language, say, what does this mean in English? And they'll try to translate that as close as they can into an English language translation. They'll try to match up the English, Hebrew, and Greek words. And remember, word order is very different in Hebrew and Greek and English sometimes. So, they'll have to play with that a little bit. The advantages here is it tends to be much easier to read. The disadvantages, the interpretation gets into it. So if I'm looking at this list, right, ESV, it's the one I use primarily. I like it because it is as much as possible, they're trying to do a formal equivalence. And I know a lot of people, I studied courses under a lot of people who were in the ESV committees and translation committees, so I know kind of what they were doing there. The NIV is less formal equivalence, more in the dynamic equivalence, right? And so they're trying to make it sound more English and easier to read. And I actually like the NIV a great deal. When I'm doing real technical studies, I go to the ESV, but when I'm just reading or I'm listening to the Bible, audio, I like the NIV for that, okay? The NLT is even further into the dynamic equivalence realm, right? And then you've got some options here, the Holman and the Lexham English Bible. These are, once again, somewhere in between, and they do a pretty good job, right? And the CSB, once again, it's all in there. You can see that this tool here in Logos shows me each verse and how the different translations that I've chosen. There, like I said, I've got 100 plus, but these are the ones I just look at quickly, and it shows me how much difference there are between them using the ESV as the standard. Okay, and so you have to deal with that. Is it formal? Is it dynamic? The other thing you can have is some sort of optimal equivalence, which is a balance of the two. And a lot of these will use some form of balance as they're doing that. So they try to do whatever's best to get the language very readable for an English reader, but to also not miss some of the nuance of the word order or the grammar and the word choices. So you'll have that. Bibles out there that are paraphrases, pure paraphrases. They don't try to line up the words and the meaning at all. And the New Living Translation is not that bad, but there are some other ones that are really very much a paraphrase. I don't particularly like those myself because I'm used to being able to work in the original language. But once again, some people may find that easier, especially a lot of the young adult and children's Bibles that I had my kids starting with. They were all paraphrases, obviously, because they're not going to get everything word for word there. And then one of the big ones here is the interlinear translation, where as much as possible, the ones I use tend to have the ability to have an interlinear, where they have the English word tied to a Greek or Hebrew word or word group so that we can see what that means. So that helps, especially somebody who has some familiarity with the original languages. So you have that. One of the big issues between these different translations is, especially for the Hebrew or for the Old Testament version portion of it, is it Masoretic text? Is it Septuagint text, or do they have a combination of the Dead Sea Scrolls? What I really like is the ESV. They make a choice. They stick to the Masoretic text most of the time for the Old Testament, but they will defer to the Septuagint if that appears to have the better evidence for being more original. And they definitely have thrown in a few things in there where they've adjusted the translation based on Dead Sea Scroll readings, because there are some texts where we have a couple copies in the Dead Sea Scrolls of some of the books, and we don't have much anywhere else of it. And remember, the Masoretic text is relatively new comparatively, right? Dead Sea Scrolls were at the time of Christ, the Masoretic text. They didn't start putting together the Masoretic text at least 400 years after Christ. And usually it was upwards in the thousands before they finalized a lot of that work. So you have all that. You got to deal with that. Okay. There is another one, and this could be an issue, is the Textual Criticism translation. So most of the more prominent English language versions try to use the earliest possible text, right? This is why some people like the King James, because it's based on the Textus Receptus, not the Westcourt Greek. So, hey, there aren't that many, the differences aren't that big, so whatever gets you, right? And then there's a big cultural issue here, once again, and it depends upon which version you're reading. If you're reading a word for word, it tends to be more literal. So in Hebrew, the phrase is "his nose burned," right? And in Hebrew is a very graphic language, right? It talks about your face being flushed, your nose burning, your bowels, turning over. When they're talking about emotions, for example, where someone who may not understand what a nose burning might mean, the translation would be "he became angry," right? Excuse me. So your formal equivalents, once again, you're talking about the NASB, the ESVs. Your dynamics tend to be the NIV, the NLTs. The optimal is the CSB, which a lot of people like that one now. Paraphrase, you don't see it up here, is the Message, because they just changed it completely. Then you start getting into interlinear, which are word mapping with study tools. And then the Textual Criticism tends to be NRSV or the ESV, right? And cultural translation, if you go to a more modern, they tend to make some cultural changes based upon what we now know, okay? And so that's one of the reasons I don't like really old translations, because a lot of them, they don't take into effect some of the stuff we learned from the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? So you take that in there. So understanding, when you're going from an ancient language to English, it can be difficult for all the reasons I've mentioned there. All right, so here's a great example, though. Acts 10:13, one of my favorite passages to point this out, right? And there came a voice to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." Okay, 10:13. Here we go. 12, I lost 13. Here's 13. And there came to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." And this is where I'm going to say all the translations are wrong that do it this way. Kill here is this Greek word tyson. Tyson is a word that is used almost exclusively in the New Testament and exclusively in the Septuagint for sacrificial killing. Okay? For killing at the temple, a sacrifice. And so if we go back here to our text comparison, you'll see there are a few that talk about slaughter. Slaughter would be more, but slaughter is still not sacrificial eating or sacrificial killing. And that has a big difference in how you interpret this text, because the people who sacrifice for an offering are typically priests. Now, so the only people in Second Temple Jewish society who would know the intricacies of doing a temple sacrifice would either be somebody who was born into a priestly family and had some training, or was a Pharisee trying to live up to a ritual purity standard that perhaps even exceeded the purity of the priests, right? And so the fact that this word is used here when God is talking to Peter means that we can assume something about Peter that is hidden by the English word slaughter or kill. It really should be sacrificing, and that would, because if they use sacrifice, that would immediately throw up a red flag in most people's eyes. Say, wait a minute, what sacrifice? What's he talking about, right? Okay, so let's get back here. It keeps going. It gets better. 14. But Peter said, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean." The ESV is really good here, right? A lot of the other ones talk about impure or unclean, profane or unclean. The NLT, I love it. They enlarged it. Our Jewish laws have declared it impure and unclean. Okay, what we're talking about here is we have a sheet has come down. There are all kinds of animals on there. And on this sheet are animals that are kosher, clean, or available for food, and common. And if we look here at the ESV, right, you'll see that in the Greek it is koinon, which is common, or akthethon, which is unclean, which is ritually unclean. Doesn't mean that the animal itself is not available for food, but for some reason, as far as Peter is concerned, there's a ritual reason why this is unclear. This is not available to be slaughtered or killed, especially in a sacrificial sense. Now, what's important here, and that's why not having the word sacrifice up in 13 doesn't make it clear why this is an issue. But if Peter is, as I have proposed, potentially from a priestly family at least, right, that he knows the priestly duties, and so the rules of how to sacrifice for a priestly in the temple, right, service would be known to him. That would make this very important to understand what was unclean, right? Or if he was a Pharisee trying to up to that level of purity, he would know what the stuff was. This may not be something that the average person would try to do. He's taking on an extra layer of purity rules. This is very important then for the story, right? And you don't see it because you don't see sacrifice in the beginning, and then since not everyone uses common or unclean, you don't know. And let's just look here. Only links you to another one. If we look up the word common, right? Defiled, common, unclean, to lie, common, or open to all, common, or belong to several, which are several are partakers, right? It's like, huh? And that's that variation of that one word can mean a great deal, right? But the thing you're trying to understand here is that common food, right, in Hebrew parlance, is not food that you would eat, right? So pork is not a defiled food, okay? Pork is not defiled. Pork is common. Pork is not available to eat for Jews, okay, who follow the dietary laws. It's not defiled. And so when I look at these text comparisons, right, and they talk about impure or unclean, I mean, the NIV just gets it completely wrong, right? They use two completely wrong words here, right, for this translation. So at least if you had 2 or 3 variations that you were comparing it to, go, why is this such a difference? And you can delve into it. And if you don't know the underlying Hebrew or Greek, you can learn to use Logos to get into that a little bit. you can ask someone who knows Hebrew or Greek, i.e. you can ask me a question, and I'll be more than happy to answer for you, right? But the idea is that you're looking for something that would help you quickly spot that there's something that needs to be talked about here. Now, whole long lesson on Acts 10 and what it means and how you can interpret it. But the idea is that these are the tools I look for to help you find out, hey, check up on. Are the words significantly different from each other that they don't make sense? And then if you look at the underlying Greek or Hebrew, maybe there's something there that doesn't make sense, right? And so that helps us really understand, because once again, the people who did the translations, they have a hard job, right? To translate all that work into English is difficult, and to do it in such a way as to be acceptable, right, for print. Remember, each one of these major translations had a ton of money behind it to get published, and then it has to be published, which is very expensive, and then they have to sell the publications, which is where the money comes in for the publisher, right? This is not easy. Except one of the things that is very important here is that sometimes decisions are made not because it's appropriate for the word, right? Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Well, guess what? Most people, in America at least, know that verse from the King James. They can, give it to you word for word. And if the version of the Bible you're buying in English, you go to your Christian bookstore and you open up the Bible and you look at it and it says something weird. It doesn't say the Lord is my shepherd and I shall not want. And you go, oh, there's something wrong with this translation because I know what that one means. And that kills your sales. And so you'll find that becomes very interesting. Speaking of which, here we go. Let's just look at that, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall lack nothing. Okay, here's the lexicon. Yahweh is my shepherd, right? So instead of saying the Lord, let's say, yeah, I will not lack for anything. Okay, and that kind of gets in there, right? He shall make me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. And so they're all still getting very, very similar here. But one of the things they don't tell you is what is a green pasture in David's day where sheep are left out to. It's not, when we think of green pastures here in the United States, right, we think of these beautiful, lush green pastures where the sheep are grazing and the cows are off on the hillside. And no, you're talking scrub grass in Israel, okay, typically. It is a desert community. It is a desert country. And so green pastures are pastures that have a lot of plants growing on it, but it's not like this soft, beautiful green picture that we always get. And no one really changes this wording to tell you that that's what it is, right? So there are decisions made by the translators to make sure that the book that they're putting together, and they are putting together a book, it's at a great cost, will have a good chance of being sold. Okay? They're in it for the money, obviously, at some point, right? At some point in their life, they're in there for the money. Okay? It's their job, right? You have all these translators are in there. You've got to do that. So just always keep that in mind. All right. If this was interesting or if I just rambled, let me know. Put it in the comments. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you would like me to look into more for you. I love doing this sort of stuff. And look in the description, you'll see a link for Logos where you get 30 days and a discount. Hey, I like this program a lot. And if any of you get into Logos, then I'll be more than happy to show you guys how to use it to full effect. I've been using it for well over 20 years. It's worth getting, okay? And the subscription costs are very low now. So try it, and you get 30 days for free, and you get a discount after that. So you might as well try it. And besides that, there'll be a link to my blog post where I publish a bunch of articles and stuff. And so you might find something on there that you really like. That you might ask me to do a video on or something. So be good, be blessed, and remember, God is good all the time. Thank you.